Welcome to the Earth Your Wild podcast, brought to you by Reusabox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and changemakers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet? Today we're chatting to Hannah Beatrice from the Marmalade Trust. The Marmalade Trust is an award-winning loneliness charity dedicated to raising awareness of loneliness and supporting people to find new social connections. Welcome to the podcast, Hannah. It's great to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I wanted to start, Hannah. This might sound like a bit of a strange question, but what is loneliness? Can you define it?
So, yeah, of course, loneliness is not what everyone thinks it is. It's a natural human emotion. It's something that we feel, that we experience, that everyone is going to experience at some point in their lives. And actually, what we tend to think of loneliness as something that happens to other people. So it's something that we don't always have the tools, I guess, to realize that we're experiencing ourselves when we are experiencing it. But really, in a nutshell, it's a human emotion. And it's normally when we do recognize that we're experiencing it, how we like to describe it is it's a signal to us. So, if you're feeling hungry, then you know that you want to eat. If you're feeling thirsty, you know you want to drink. If you're feeling lonely, then basically it's a signal that you are lacking some sort of social connection in some way. So that's kind of your signal to seek that out in whatever way that looks like to you.
And can you tell us, what the Marmalade Trust is and what you guys do and how Loneliness Awareness Week came to be?
Yeah, of course. So Marmalade Trust is a charity based in Bristol, and it started in 2012. Our founder, Amy Perrin, was working at the time as an occupational therapist. And what she found is that a lot of the people that she was working with were going to be on their own at Christmas time. So Amy basically took it upon herself to organise a Christmas lunch for people. And as soon as she started letting people know, it kind of escalated very quickly as she realised there was a real need for this. So that's kind of now what's known as our Christmas Cheer project. And we've been running that every year since. So in 2013, after that initial year of running Christmas Cheer, Marmalade Trust was formed. And we've been working with people experiencing loneliness, persistent loneliness mainly. So that's when they're experiencing it most all of the time. Through our projects. But then in 2017, basically Amy discovered that there was a need for a real kind of campaign that raised awareness of loneliness, because the biggest issue is obviously there is a lack of understanding of what loneliness is, which is why, we started with a question about what is loneliness, and also stigma surrounding loneliness. So that's where Loneliness Awareness Week came from, as kind of a campaign that everyone across the world can get involved in to start that conversation. And I joined the team to kind of help manage the campaign last year. And, all the way from back in 2017, when it started as let's talk loneliness. And, a few grassroots organisations were getting involved. The government was still very much involved at the time. But now we've grown to kind of a campaign where we've had 17 countries across the world doing events for Loneliness Awareness Week, and 15 million people on social media alone were joining in the conversation. You could see over 10 years, 9 years last year, but over 10 years this year is what we're celebrating, just how much that's grown and just how much that conversation has seemed to become increasingly more important in kind of, those mainstream conversations, as well as kind of government and policy conversations as well.
Is there a story behind the name, the Marmalade Trust?
There is a story behind the name. So again, it goes back to Amy's personal experiences. So she's experienced loneliness herself. And what she realised is that loneliness is something that often people experience initially as a child. And often the first connection you make, or your first friend as a child, is your teddy bear. And then linking teddy bears to Paddington Bear, marmalade sandwiches. So that's where the name Marmalade Trust came from.
Yeah, it immediately made me think of Paddington. So yeah, I think it's nice. It works.
Yeah, we've got in the office, we've got a picture on the wall of where Amy was kind of scribbling notes at the time. And before she wrote Marmalade Trust, she wrote In Marmalade We Trust, and that became Marmalade Trust.
Oh, nice.
So research from Marmalade Trust found that stigma is one of the biggest barriers stopping people from opening up about loneliness. Why is there still a shame or taboo around admitting you're lonely, especially for adults in professional life?
Yeah, so I mean, I touched on a little bit about the stigma surrounding loneliness. We did some research last year which showed that kind of 80% of people who said that they experienced loneliness, more than 60% of them had like never opened up to anyone about it. And the reasons that they gave for that were kind of, embarrassment, fear of judgment. So there's obviously still that kind of feeling that, you're not going to be well received if you tell someone that you feel lonely. And I think the reason for that is because people still think that loneliness is like the same as kind of being alone or a loner, or they still that imagine, like I said, that it happens to someone who's not them. So, often we think of it as kind of only happening to older people. So often we see loneliness as something, either it's the same as being alone or a loner, or it's something that only happens to people who's not like us, like older people, or people, who are kind of, on their own at their older point in their lives, basically. So we think that there's that stigma attached to it. So then we don't want to say to people, actually, it's happening to me. And often we can feel lonely even if we're surrounded by people. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on your own. You can be in a room surrounded by people. And if you don't feel like you have a connection to those people for whatever reason, then you can feel very, very lonely. I'm sure we've all experienced it, being in a room full of people and feeling lonely. But like I said, we don't always realize that that's what we're experiencing, because that stigma is inbuilt in us as well, to not necessarily recognize that emotion. Because I bet most people don't think of loneliness as a feeling or an emotion. But, it's in the same way we feel sadness, we feel anger, we can feel lonely as well.
Yeah, so just building on that. Yeah, it's interesting you talked about like there's this kind of shame about admitting it, because I guess it could come about when people experience certain life-changing events, if you think about it. So, I guess, people could experience like an illness, or particularly like new parents, like having a baby is like a life-changing experience. And yeah, I guess do you find that that's a huge time where these feelings can come out, or things can change? People's lives just completely change when these things happen, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So what we refer to them as is key life indicators. So there's there's times in your life when you're most likely to experience loneliness, and they always kind of appear around times of big change. So, for example, if you move to a new area and you don't know anyone, or, when you start university, that's often a big one, or a new school as a child, and then go to a new workplace, having a baby is obviously a big one, big life change. Suddenly you feel like, no one around you is experiencing the same things as you feel very disconnected. If you're grieving someone, and then, so there's lots of periods in our lives going all the way from when we're a child all the way through to, to the end of life. So having that thought that it's only when you're older that's when you experience it. There's all these periods throughout our lives. I mean, I've definitely had that when I've moved to a new place and not known anyone there, and had to kind of get to know new people. And I wouldn't have known that loneliness is what I was experiencing until when I worked for the Marmalade Trust, and I suddenly went, oh, okay, yeah, that's what that feeling was. Because I don't think I'd ever even said to anyone, you know what, I feel really lonely today, until I'd kind of have this deep level of understanding of what loneliness is that's kind of come about from kind of, obviously doing the job that I do. So that just shows you, in my own personal experience, has shown me just how much lack of understanding there still is, and just how once you do understand and start having those open conversations, how it kind of shifts everything. Because we're very much like that at Marmalade Trust. We have those kind of open conversations with each other, we share our own experiences, and we kind of just got used to doing that. And having kind of connection, creating opportunities for the connection in our workplace as well. So we kind of practice what we preach. But yeah, I've definitely seen in my own kind of journey just how far we still have to go.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were going to say something.
No, I was just thinking.
I'll tell you what I was thinking when we were like preparing for the episode. I was like, don't think I've obviously I know what loneliness is, the feeling, but I was like, I don't think I've like experienced or struggled with like loneliness. But then as you were talking, I was like, actually, I think I have when I went to secondary school. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely experienced it, like becoming a parent, because you're just thrown into that world, and especially like maternity leave, I think is really isolating. And particularly if you don't have much of a like village around you, it comes down to community, I guess, doesn't it? I mean, how can we encourage more people to speak up about it? Because like you said, like I've never really admitted that to anyone before, so this is a strange time to be admitting it on a podcast.
it's something that really isn't talked about, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why Loneliness Awareness Week exists, to have that moment in the calendar where we go, right, we're going to really focus on this and shine a light on it and make it so that, you know, this is something that people see, is something that still needs to talk about. And, you know, having that kind of opportunity for people to feel like everyone's talking about it, so it's okay for me to talk about it too, is really, really beneficial. But obviously we want to see change throughout the year. We don't just want it to be kind of one time that everyone talks about it and then no one thinks about it again. I mean, what we do find is obviously a lot of people talk about loneliness at Christmas, because there's obviously that feeling, you know, that, you know, people are with their families or they're celebrating, and, you know, then people start to think about, well, what if people don't have that? And, you know, and again, that older people stigma, because, you know, they're more likely to be on their own at Christmas potentially. So bringing it, Loneliness Awareness Week happens 15th to 21st of June. So having it in the summer, I think, is quite a nice like balance out as well, because to show, you know, it's not just at Christmas. This is something that people are struggling with kind of all year. And, you know, I think I might have mentioned, like, it sounds really simple, but just having that starting that conversation is the first step you can take. Once you talk about it, then people realize, you know, actually the response I'm getting isn't as negative as maybe I thought. And then, you know, you can then kind of realize other people feel the same as you, and understand that it's not just you who's experiencing it. And I think, you know, having that kind of understanding of what loneliness is, how it impacts people, you know, it can impact if they're experiencing persistent loneliness, especially where they're feeling it most all of the time. That's when it can really have detrimental impacts on your health, physical and mental health. So, you know, get talking about it before you get to that point, before you get to the point of it actually being really detrimental to your health. The only way you're going to do that is by actually opening up to someone. So that's why Loneliness Awareness Week is all about conversation, but all about, you mentioned community as well. So creating those opportunities for meaningful connections. So people, you know, hold activities or events throughout Loneliness Awareness Week, and that's all about bringing people together. And some of those events might be things that are already happening, but they just make sure that loneliness is on the agenda. Or it could be things that, you know, we had a kid who wanted to start an art class, and he just started one in his local park, invited people, and, you know, I think like 30 to 40 people came. And so then he realized there's all these other people who want to do the same things as me, and that continued. And that's kind of our key aim for it, is people might start something during Loneliness Awareness Week, realize actually there's a need for it in their community, and that other people want to connect as well. And then that continues beyond just the week itself.
And we talked about this kind of stereotype, this idea of loneliness being, you know, maybe old people alone at Christmas. But is that necessarily true? I mean, who are most affected by loneliness in our society? Who is most affected?
Yeah, sure. So currently the research tells us that actually it's kind of 16 to 24-year-olds, younger people, who are the most lonely in the UK, at least. So it's really shifting. And that's coming up again and again in research. I know Scotland did some research recently. They found the same there. So across the board, it's becoming that, you know, older and younger generations are most likely to be affected, but it's shifting more towards the younger generations. And the reasons for that, obviously, we know that people are becoming more digitally focused, but we also don't want digital to be blamed for loneliness. You know, obviously it's a massive massive tool that we can use to connect as well. So it's all in how we use it. And if we're using it to connect and then taking those connections into real life connection, then it's fantastic. But if we're kind of losing our connection to real life in turn of digital connection, then potentially, just talking to AI chatbots and things like that, then obviously that could potentially be a cause. So yeah, we are definitely seeing that shift. And I think that that's, again, why a campaign like the one that we run is really important, because actually it's for everyone. And it does make, the way that we kind of promote it, and we have the way that we have every year, we have a different focus and we have a different kind of design and look and feel, and I think it speaks to all age groups, which is what Marmalade Trust does as well. We work with all age groups as well, so I think that really opens up the conversation. It is something that young people can see and go, oh, that speaks to me. So having that kind of focus through campaigning and through conversation, online and offline at the same time, I think is really important. And through workplaces as well, the younger people are the next generation. So how can workplaces understand, if the younger people are feeling that way and they're coming into our workplaces, how is that, if that's happening more and more and more, how can we kind of change the way we're working, or how can we have better understanding of loneliness to make sure that we're equipped to deal with the next generation?
Yeah. Do you have any tips for employers on how they can support younger workers or those suffering from loneliness?
Yeah, it's the same, I guess, as what I've said, is kind of understanding what loneliness is first. And we actually run training on this. Marmalade Trust run training for workplaces, and we've worked with people like Heineken to run this training. And the first level is kind of understanding it. So understanding why it matters, understanding the impact it could have on people, because I don't think most people realise just the impact it can have on your physical and mental health. And then obviously, for when you're at home, people take that into work as well. So having that kind of understanding, but then also turning that into action. So we have a level 2 training, which is kind of shifting more to action. And that training, like I said, we practice what we preach at Marmalade Trust. So one of the things that we've done is every week we used to have a team meeting. So we changed it so that now we have a team meeting every other week. And then the week where we don't have a team meeting, we have connection time. And in that connection time, that could be, playing a game, or doing speed dating with, where we go around and ask each other questions. And then at the end, we have to remember facts about each other. Or we we have resources on the Loneliness Awareness Week website, like connection cards and compliment jar. And we do those in the office together. So we kind of practice what we preach. That's terms of taking that action as a team. And, I completely understand people can feel like this is an extra, this is an addition that we have to do. But actually, once you've taken the time to do that, just how much more energized is everyone, how much better do we all work together? It's much easier for us to, if you're all either we're all sitting in an office and kind of just getting on with our work, or we're all now remote working, and maybe we're not talking to each other as often, or having those kind of moments of connection, like when we're making a cup of tea or something like that. So have actually really just putting aside the time for that, you have much better, I think, a much more connected workforce, because everyone kind of suddenly feels better to approach each other, feels more, they have a better understanding of each other. So I think that gives a real opportunity. You just have to put the time aside for that now, I think, rather than expecting it to just happen naturally, because we're not all in one place together necessarily every day, working in the same building, where we just all bump into each other and have those moments of connection. So I think it's really important to have that.
Do you think the hybrid working or working from home way of living that we now have, or way of working, do you think that can exacerbate loneliness? Obviously it brings lots of benefits as well, but I don't know, just speaking from my own experience, I know that it helps me coming into the office, and I know that I wouldn't do that well if I was just working from home all the time. I know that I would probably feel lonely, but or equally, I know other people that love just working from home all the time and have remote jobs. So I don't know, does it just depend on the person?
Yes. And I mean, I think, obviously, I'm not an expert in whether remote working can make someone feel more lonely or not. But what I can say is my personal experience, mostly I worked from home. And when I was working from home and living alone, that definitely had an impact, even though I am still one of those people that loves to have remote working and that freedom. So I think, yes, definitely it can have an impact on an individual, talking from personal experience, but also in terms of kind of anecdotally. So through Loneliness Awareness Week, we obviously talk to loads of partners, And I was talking to a lady who runs a whole community for people who are mainly designers, creatives, and work remotely. And they recently put up a whole post about loneliness on their own community, because she was basically talking about how remote working has an impact. And they also put up an article about that, and they quoted us in the article. So definitely it's something that people are having a conversation more and more about, I think. I don't know whether we're at a place where we can say just how much of an impact that has. I'm not sure how much research has been done into that. Or, obviously remote working has been something that's been around for a while, but it's not something that we've all been doing in the way we are for so long. I think definitely like during COVID-19, that had a big impact. But I think that's partly because people were not only working from home, but they also couldn't connect in other ways as well. So I think we haven't maybe had enough time to see since then, actually, with the remote working culture and also the ability to connect in other ways, just how much impact that has. And like I say, if workplaces and communities are taking those actions to actually build those opportunities for meaningful connection, or to understand, what it is that people are feeling and experiencing, and how they can create those like connection times or take those actions to have an impact, then I think we'll really see a shift. And that's something that obviously throughout, we've been going for 10 years with Loneliness Awareness Week, and this kind of systemic change takes a long time. But I think as we start to kind of take that action, as people realize, this isn't something that just happened during COVID-19, this is something that, is now part of the way we work and the way we live. And that's potentially impacting more. What action can we take? And once they do that, I think we'll really see a shift in a more positive direction.
And if there's any like businesses listening, what's the most important thing they could do to try and help loneliness in their workplace?
Well, we have lots of resources on our website. We have a Understanding Loneliness guide. So I think starting there is really beneficial for leaders to just kind of have that introduction and to start thinking about, how their workplace connect, and, starting to build more opportunities for that, I think, into every day. I think that's one thing that they can really do, and just kind of learning about it and reading about it and then taking action.
Mm-hmm.
So research shows loneliness is now as harmful to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Why aren't we treating this like the health crisis it clearly is? Is this something GPs, employers, and policymakers are taking seriously enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think a lot of positive steps have been taken in the right direction. So the campaign launched in 2017. Since then, in 2018, we got the First Minister for Loneliness. So it became a real central focus for the government. They created something called the Tackling Loneliness Hub, which basically is a way for all the people who are kind of working in either areas of community or connection or loneliness to connect through a hub which shares resources. We all kind of talk to each other. There's events. So that's a really big step forward as well, just in terms of like bringing that community together. And just last year, the World Health Organization actually announced social isolation and loneliness as kind of a global health crisis, as something, we really need to focus on. And that obviously has a big impact on kind of people taking notice of it. There being kind of funding directed towards it. This year, the UK government relaunched their youth loneliness strategy. So there's a lot of kind of focus and attention being put into kind of, as I said, young people are the loneliest in the UK. So now that's really being recognised in government action as well. So there's a lot of action being taken. I think, this campaign has been running for 10 years, and we run it on what's known as a theory of change model. So the theory of change model is anything, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but anything where there's kind of large systemic change, you have actions that need to be taken over time, and they're not linear, and they do take a long time. So like, even though we've seen all of that fantastic action being taken, and that, loneliness and social isolation really being recognised for the impact that it has, I think the World Health Organization says 1 in 6 people are impacted across the world. So we also know there's still a long way to go. And that definitely, the next step is definitely having kind of a more better understanding in terms of business, because how we see it is, you've got kind of the socially connected human in the center, and then across coming out from them in the different in their communities, they might come into connection with transport services or with their supermarkets or, you know, they go to a community centre, or they, you know, they work at a local business. So they're connected to the whole community. And that means that every part of the community has a role to play in creating a socially connected human. And every interaction that we have is an opportunity for us to reduce loneliness in our communities. So having that wider understanding in all of those in all the different sectors, and that's the thing, you know, this touches across the whole community, the whole sector, all the sectors. And having that understanding and knowing what action you can take, and that's going to be different for different people, different businesses, how they kind of work together. But as an ecosystem, eventually we will all work together. So that kind of level of change obviously takes a long time, but we're definitely taking large steps towards that, I think.
I suppose that would have like a much far-reaching impact on like health as well, you know, which would probably be good for people and the economy in general.
So what happens if like loneliness isn't kind of caught in the bud, so to speak? Like, does it lead to kind of mental health conditions, or can it do that? What happens?
Yeah, I mean, loneliness has been linked to, you know, premature death, diabetes, mental health. Loneliness is not a mental health issue in itself. But if you experience loneliness most all of the time, you are more likely to experience mental health problems. And then vice versa, if you experience mental health problems, you are more likely to experience loneliness. So they are interlinked, but it's, you know, often people think it's a mental health problem. It's not. It's an emotion. And yeah, obviously, if, like I say, you know, the first step is kind of talking about it and being and opening up about it. And if that doesn't happen, then what it leads to is persistent loneliness, where people are experiencing it more and more and more. And then, you know, that leads to somebody retreating more as well. And so it kind of becomes kind of self-fulfilling. It's a vicious circle, I guess. So once it gets to that level, then obviously what we see is that it has more of a kind of impact on mental and physical health. And that's when obviously it's kind of at the point where it's harder to have an impact. So I think that's why Loneliness Awareness Week exists, to try and, you know, stop it getting to that point. If we have like a conversation about it and we'll all feel more open about it and there's no stigma surrounding it, then more people will feel able to have those conversations and won't get to that point.
Yeah. So there's a growing conversation about purposeful business. How does tackling something like loneliness fit into the idea of purpose at work?
So obviously purposeful business is about how people experience work day to day, not just about what the organisation actually delivers on a larger scale. So loneliness has an impact on how people engage, how they contribute, how they feel, like if they belong to the organisation. And it's definitely linked, therefore, to kind of, you know, their performance and kind of retention. And we know that retention is one of the biggest costs for an organisation. So reducing loneliness clearly is not separate from the purpose of an organisation. It's part of it. It's about designing work in a way that makes connection kind of easier, more natural, you know, is embedded into the organisation's overall kind of aims and their purpose. So we don't see them as two separate things. We see them as definitely one and the same. And that's why, you know, we offer this training for the businesses, because that gives them that opportunity to see how they can kind of embed it and then therefore have an impact on their wider purpose and, you know, the kind of engagement levels and performance levels of their employees as well.
And is there a link between like happiness and loneliness, do you think?
So, I mean, happiness is an emotion in the same way that loneliness is emotion. And I guess that they're all linked, aren't they? So like, you know, we could say if you're happy, you're less likely to feel angry. If you're happy, you're less likely to feel lonely. But I think that loneliness can come and go. So in the same way that any other emotions can come, you know, you can feel happy at one time and then lonely at another. And there's definitely a link to them, but it's the same as any kind of emotion, I think, that we experience.
Yeah. And I guess the main thing for businesses then is, by trying to tackle this, there should be some sort of productivity benefit, or, you know, people will maybe stay in companies longer and be more productive. Have you got any kind of like specific stories about stuff that you've done with businesses? Or
well, in terms of the training, we've obviously worked with one of our kind of main key partners is Heineken. and they've supported a lot of our work. So we've done a lot of stuff with them. So as well as kind of fundraising for, services to support people experiencing persistent loneliness. They've done a lot of that in their kind of pubs and in their main business as well. We've also kind of run the training with them, and they've kind of been a leader in running that training in all of their pubs as well. Because obviously, how I explained, in a community, people kind of have connections to all different services, and obviously pubs are a real kind of place where people can connect. So having that kind of leader in a community that have, a real understanding of loneliness and their role to play in it is really important. I think kind of playing a real kind of leading role in that, which is fantastic. And as well as, the work that we do with them on an ongoing basis, we also kind of, when it comes to Loneliness Awareness Week, we have loads of partnerships across the board. We have everything, community groups running, coffee mornings, all the way to kind of workspaces like Kindred in London, who they run a whole Together Fest, they call it. So a whole festival, whole week's worth of events during Loneliness Awareness Week as well. And they've really built that into their ethos as well, is of having connection kind of as just a part of what they do all the time. So I think this is a fantastic way for people to get involved and to, try something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big event like what I just said, but potentially that maybe you want to do something like it, maybe it grows over the years and you end up kind of doing something really big. But to start off with, even if you just put loneliness on your team meeting agenda for that week, or say you create, if you have a open space where anyone can kind of connect, then we have resources on our website. And you can create what we call a connections corner. So we have, chatty table signs, we have connection cards, we have like what I mentioned, the compliment jar. You could just create a space for people to connect during the week, which I think, can just be something really simple that anyone can do, especially in kind of restaurants and things as well, where they have that space potentially. And one thing that we are starting this year as well is something we do with schools mainly, but we're also saying it translates to workspaces really well as well, is Share an Orange. So we created a lot of lesson plans around how young people can kind of just, share something together and how that can create moments of connection. So we say orange because obviously it's linked to marmalade, but it can be anything. And I think that translates really well to workspaces as well. Maybe they just want to have a Share an Orange day, or share a moment in the week, and that just gives them a place to start with. How do we start to create moments of connection in our workspaces? So it's a really great opportunity for everyone to just try something, and also to feel part of something as well. Because we have on the website, we have a connections map. And on there, we had like 6,500 different activities happening across the world. So it's a really lovely place where people can put what they're doing. And even if it's a closed activity, so, it's just for our staff members, they can still put it. But it means the people in their community can see that they're supporting Loneliness Awareness Week and that they are doing something around connection. So once they're on there, then we obviously talk about them as a partner as well. So it's a really lovely kind of way for people to kind of join together and show that they're kind of part of something bigger as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely way of just like growing the culture in your team and in it, just from a business perspective, because you want your team to come to work and be happy and enjoy coming there and enjoy working with the people that they work with. That you don't want them to come to work and feel lonely or or sad or like they can't open up to people, do you? So I think that's really good tips.
I think the idea of trying to create connection within a business, like there's one little thing that we did a couple of years ago in our business, is we got everyone to start having lunch together in the same room, and we had we got a smaller amount of bigger tables. So you have to like sit next to someone, because I heard it on a podcast. So I was like, oh, I'm going to copy that. But it sounds really silly, but it's like one tiny thing that had a huge impact. And it was probably like a bit awkward for people at first because we're like a small business. So people got used to sort of doing their own thing at lunch. And then when we did this, initially, I think it was a little bit forced. But now I think lunchtime it feels like a time for connection with people.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the same that we did, like I said, during that connection time when we're kind of having those activities as a group. We also kind of eat lunch together as well. And yeah, just sharing food. I think there's something about that, isn't there, where it just brings people together, kind of gives you something to kind of concentrate on, so you don't necessarily feel so. If you feel anxious about connecting or socially engaging, then it's like it gives you something to come together around, where you're not so the focus. And everyone likes it, do they? When they say, everyone go around in a circle and kind of introduce themselves, you're kind of put on a spot. So having it like this kind of more connection, which feels more natural, I think is really important, and just makes people feel more open and able to kind of engage with it. So yeah, I agree with that.
So for someone listening right now who recognises that they or someone around them is lonely but doesn't know what to do, what's your honest, practical advice?
So it's all about kind of recognising that that's what you're feeling. So that's the first step. If you've heard something in this conversation today, and you've kind of, as we were having the conversation, Jack, you said as well, actually I have experienced this. So if you're feeling that as well, you think that sounds like me, I've definitely had that experience, or I'm having that experience. So that's kind of the first step. And then understanding that that's a normal, natural human emotion. And then maybe there's somebody that you trust. I mean, when we did our research last year, people said they were most likely to talk about it to somebody. We know people weren't talking about it, but if they were to, they were most likely to open up to kind of a family member or a friend. So really having that person that you trust, that you can open up to, I think is a really great start. So telling them, actually, this is something I'm experiencing, and this is kind of what it feels like. And then, realizing that if you're experiencing that, all it's telling you is that there's a mismatch basically between the social engagement that you want and social engagement that you are getting, because somebody could be on their own a lot more and not necessarily feel it, and others will need it more, or need more social engagement to kind of not feel lonely, and that's okay. Everything's like it's all natural. And I think just understanding, okay, well, if it's a mismatch between the social engagement I'm getting and social engagement that I want, then obviously the action to take is to kind of seek out, places where you can get that meaningful opportunity for connection. So finding places in your local community that offer opportunities for you to kind of volunteer, or, maybe you're really into poetry and they're doing a poetry jam, or, people are into gardening and you want to join a gardening group or a local kind of community garden. So there's lots of different ways to kind of respond to that, but having that first understanding of what it is, that's what you're experiencing, and opening up to somebody that you trust are definitely the first two, and then potentially taking action.
As you were talking, I was kind of thinking, I'm always kind of thinking like we're trying to build a company and a team, and I'm always thinking like, how do we relate it back to that, for my own selfish reasons. And I was kind of thinking as you were talking, when you were talking about how it's about kind of like trust, dealing with loneliness. And I was thinking, actually, like that's so important to build a team. You need like high levels of trust in a team and in a company. And I think there is a tendency for businesses to think these are things that are not a top priority to focus on or to build into our strategy, because we have to sell our product, or we have our targets or our KPIs or whatever. But as you were talking, I was thinking, actually, this is probably a really simple, easy, free thing, that businesses should focus on, trying to eliminate loneliness from their workplace, and trying to build more trust in their teams. That probably has a huge impact on a company. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. No, I 100% agree. So, I mean, we find that with the partners that we work with, once they kind of start making these changes, and they notice the same things. So that's why we work with people. They don't just come and go over 1 year. People kind of come back year after year and want to engage with loneliness, whereas we can the work the Marmalade Trust are doing. Because I think once you start making these changes, you realise what an impact it does have. So I agree.
So what does success actually look like for Loneliness Awareness Week and the Marmalade Trust in 10 years' time? And how will the world be different?
Success, as I mentioned, we're working on that kind of theory of change model. And success for us would look like all of those areas that I talked about in terms of like the connected human and the different sectors, understanding loneliness and knowing what role they can play in making sure that we have more connected communities. So all the actions that we're taking are leading to that kind of large scale systemic change where we kind of have obviously, government recognition and policy changes, but on the ground, kind of large organizations, third sector organizations, businesses all working together to make sure that kind of, we reduce loneliness so that it's not getting to the point where people are experiencing kind of persistent loneliness most or all of the time, having that impact on their physical and mental health.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've mentioned this, but we might have forgotten to ask you, but when is Loneliness Awareness Week? Because I think it's coming up, isn't it?
So Loneliness Awareness Week takes place between the 15th to the 21st of June, but people can already start to get involved. Our connections map is already live, so people are already adding events to it. So if there's anything that you're kind of running, and you can add things that are happening all the way from the start of April to the end of June. So anything that kind of you're running and you're planning on talking about loneliness, or you want to use Loneliness Awareness Week resources, you can add it to there. And we also have lots of resources for people who want to share things on social media. So there's a social media toolkit, and people can start kind of talking about the fact that they're going to support Loneliness Awareness Week and the reasons why, and accessing kind of our Understanding Loneliness guide as well is a great place to start.
Oh, perfect.
Thanks for your time, Hannah. I guess that's a wrap.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly
Worth your while.
For more information, visit reuserbox.co.uk/earthyourwhile.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reuserbox.co.uk.